Are we ready for a deeper dive into this idea of the Protestant Reformation? And ultimately, what is it that we should be protesting? And in this course, it's going to be a little bit longer course, but ultimately we're going to get into just this idea of protesting paganism. Now, when we think of the Protestant Reformation, right, we think of Martin Luther back in 1517 and this 95 Theses, mostly focused around should you pay indulgences, right? But if we really go deeper, like we gotta understand it's far deeper than just that. And what I recommend you actually take is the course I have on the Great Court Case. It gives just a much deeper perspective, or broader perspective even, and focuses into, ultimately, this is just a choice. It's a choice between God's government and the rebellion, right? So do we want God's way of doing things, or do we like what we see here on earth? Right? Because that's what this is. Ultimately, without a better analogy, this is a petri dish of free will, allowing this rebellion to run its course in order to contrast between God's way or rejecting God's commandments, right? And this is this kind of, we become this cautionary tale of the abuse of free will, but ultimately that's what it all comes down to is, do we trust God, right? Or do we distrust God? And in order for this free will to fully be realized, there needs to be a mechanism, right? There has to be some way to demonstrate who we wish to serve. Now, back in the Garden of Eden, this mechanism was done by God saying, look, eat of everything here, amazing food for us, just don't eat of this one, tree. And that tree was symbolic. It had nothing to do with the actual tree itself. It was a symbolism of, hey, don't pull this lever, right? And then Lucifer went down, right? And he was seducing Eve with the idea of being a god. And then, he tries to continue to deceive this. Well, we understand that, they pulled the lever that says we are not sure if we trust God or not. And that started this whole, what we call the fall. And after the fall, life got harder. And Adam and Eve multiplied, right? There was 3 children that we have the names of, many more children than that, but that's the 3 we have the names of. And the first 2 of those children were given really a choice again of, hey, here's how I want you to, sacrifice. And again, they had the choice, right? From this, Cain said, I'll worship the way I want to worship, right? He said that he thought he had his own way of worshiping. Right? And that resulted in really the first, the first death. And if we do the math on that, 1/3 rebelled. So ultimately, this created this pathway that we see today. The sons of men, right? Those that distrust God, and the sons of God, those that want to follow after exactly what God says. You want me to offer in this certain way, I'll offer on this certain way. You want me to worship on this certain day, I'll worship on this certain day. It's this idea that there was this separation. And as long as this separation was intact, that the sons of God maintained this purity. But over time, right, they started to look down at the sons of man and see what they were up to. And some of their traditions started to come into. And ultimately we find that the way that they were able to be seduced was that the sons of men, their daughters, right, they looked fair to the sons of God, to ultimately the sons of Seth. And so that's what we see, that the children of Seth, attracted by the beauty of the daughters of Cain, displeased the Lord and intermarried with him. So this ultimately, if we were to boil this into, yes, sure, it talks about seduction, but even more than that, it really gets into this idea of these 2 sides, right? And one group that was ultimately pure ultimately went the way of Cain. And what we see is they did not want to retain God in their knowledge. And so they started to choose a choice with choosing themselves, choosing to distrust God. And it says that they were estranged through their idols. So they started idol worshiping, which is, again, it's another commandment that God said, don't do this thing. And so God looked down and saw that all flesh had corrupted his way, right? And so we start seeing this lineage, and, after the earth, after people left the Garden of Eden, right, there was these kind of two pathways. Pathway one, monotheism. Pathway two, rebellion against God. And from those, right, we then see, because everything was corrupted, we see that God said, okay, let's go ahead and start this over. The earth was so wicked, and I'll explain why all this is in the course, the Great Court Case. But after the flood, everything reset. And Noah had 3 sons, right? Of these, one of them rebelled. Again, 1/3 rebelled. And so we start seeing how this rebellion has resurfaced. And from this, Lot had a bunch of kids. Ham had a bunch of kids, and a few in particular, Cush, Seba, Rama, right? Those formed what we understand as Hinduism, okay? Then we have the grandson of Ham, Nimrod, who formed mystery religion. He was the one that didn't believe God's promise that there would never be a flood again, and he set out to create a tower that extends into the clouds, so that if God ever sent a flood again, he's like, we'll be untouchable. Well, Nimrod actually started really the entire movement of, through Zoroastrianism that we see today. The lineage that we see today was started by him. And one interesting piece, Nimrod was a master builder. He was actually the founder of Freemasonry. Okay? And so God saw the plans of it. He's like, we're not going to create this tower. And he confounded the language. They had Babel, right? Babylon. And so this is this idea of, when we think of Babylon in the Bible, metaphorically, it's always been confusion, false worship. Well, as we continue the story, right, Nimrod started this major movement, but he died. And what we see is that his wife, Semiramis, picked up where he left off and said, she didn't want to lose the Assyrian Empire, right? She really liked the level of the lifestyle she was in. She liked people looking to her as, looking to her through, Nimrod as, this powerful woman. And so what we see here is that his wife, Semiramis, who had no children, so her empire was under threat, she had a good cult going and didn't want to lose it. So we read here that she, Semiramis, of who we read, succeeded Ninus being Nimrod, who was his spouse. She held the land which now the Sultan rules. So she actually was able to hold the land, but the way she did it was, she said, because she had no heir, she said that Nimrod went to the sun and that the rays of the sun impregnated her. Now, if you understand this one piece, you'll understand the origin of sun worship. This is where sun worship all came from. It came from Semiramis not wanting to lose the Assyrian Empire, that, and the Zoroastrianism cult that, Nimrod has founded, and took that, likely, had intercourse with a servant or something like that, and then, likely killed him off. We see this in the story of the Black Widow, things like that. The point simply is, she had a kid, and the son was born on December 25th. This is where the winter solstice comes from. It was what we now call Christmas. It's not the birth of Jesus; it's actually the birth of Tammuz that is worshipped. We see, and again, sure, hate me. It is what it is. Hate me, but I just study history. This is what it is. So this tiny infant God, right, which was the lie that she was impregnated by the sun, becomes this new kind of ruler. Well, Semiramis and her bastard child Tammuz, he grows up and she ends up having sexual relation with him to try and carry this lineage on. We read that in history. It says, here are 3 whose love was evil, Semiramis, right, who are oppressed with shame for the unlawful distorted love. So we start seeing this. She becomes, in other cultures, she becomes Egyptian Isis, Tammuz becomes Horus, and the now immortalized Nimrod becomes Osiris. So this is, again, the foundation of sun worship. What we see is that all the different civilizations and cultures that come since are all pointing to the same 3 people, but with different names, right? Ra, Zeus, Belus, Jupiter, Baal, right? Vishnu, they're all the same person, which is Nimrod, right? Semiramis, Isis, Aphrodite, Ishtar, Venus, right? All of these same gods and goddesses point to these same three people. Tammuz is Hercules, right? It's Tammuz, Attis, right? We're going to get into Attis later. So all of these form this counterfeit religion, okay? And the easiest way to spot the counterfeit trinity is if the place where the Holy Spirit would be is a female entity. So if there's a mother figure. So anytime there's a mother introduced into the religion, or a female deity introduced in the religion, we know it's the false trinity. Mary in the Catholic Church takes on this intercessory role. She's a mediator. But we find that Jesus says no man come to the Father but through him. So this whole idea of, Mary is actually Semiramis. Hopefully this guy's going to catch on to this thing here, right? So the Catholic Church, Mary is actually Semiramis. And it's really the lineage of Zoroastrianism. And this is why when you're saying Hail Marys in the Catholic Church, right? And all of these things are like vain repetitions, but the Bible says we don't like vain repetitions. So again, when we read in the Bible about Baal and Ashtaroth, right, how they forsook the Lord and went after these two, that was Nimrod and Semiramis. And I get further into, of course, in public secrets, but ultimately this lineage was called Sol Invictus. And it's this idea of the unconquerable son. And when Assyria was conquered, right, this lineage was maintained through Babylon, then through Medo-Persia, then through Greece, down into pagan Rome. And we'll actually find and prove in this course that it also now is being held by the Pope in Papal Rome. So Papal Rome now carries the title Sol Invictus, the same title of Nimrod, of Tammuz. Sol Invictus is the official sun god of the Roman Empire, right? Roman Emperor Aurelian established the cult of Sol Invictus as the official religion of the Roman Empire. And Constantine decreed that the day of the sun, or Sunday, do you get that? Sunday, right, is the Roman day of rest instead of the biblical seventh day, Sabbath, that the Jews still keep. And so we start to see it all tied together here. The birth of Tammuz being December 25th, right? The whole idea of this lineage of sun god, it's all there. It's why they worship on Sunday instead of the Sabbath. So just as a recap, the sons of God formed the Israelites, right, through God's covenant with Abraham, whereas the post-flood rebellion brought Hinduism and the pagan mystery religion, Zoroastrianism or Mithraism. Yeah? But I want to rewind just a little bit here. And I want to talk about how the lineage of the Egyptian sun god, there was various pharaohs, and they carried the title of sun god. And one ended up enslaving the Israelites because they strayed away from God and his protection. And as we read in the story, God raised up a man named Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. And long story short, due to their unbelief, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, but finally getting the courage to claim God's promises, and God blesses them greatly. And they were led into a victory over the kings of the area, conquering everybody they met in Canaan, until they came and pitched their plains of Moab. And the people of Moab were very afraid. And so the king sent messengers unto a guy named Balaam. And, this story continues how Balaam wanted to curse these Israelites in order for money and power. But every time he spoke, he only came out with blessings. So the Israelites were unable to be beaten by war, unable to be cursed. And so what was the plan that Balaam came up with? Right? What was the doctrine of Balaam? Right? Balaam instead intended to have the young, beautiful women of Moab get all made up and infiltrate the Israelite camp, seducing the Israelites and ultimately getting them to sacrifice to pagan gods. And then a plague came into camp and killed like 24,000 of them. So again, with the exact same concept, shows how the children of Seth corrupted the children of man, now sees how Lucifer was able to, through the doctrine of Balaam, corrupt the sons of God through the daughters of man. And so let's focus our story on pagan Rome and see how they use the same tactic of contamination versus extermination. Because again, remember that the first 300 years after Jesus' ministry started, the early Christian church had experienced really expanded, right? They were just all over. And despite persecution from the Romans and the Jews, they had expanded in large ways. Right? In Acts, we to see how this persecution was almost relentless. In fact, it's believed that most all of Jesus' disciples were actually murdered. In AD 64, Emperor Nero blames the fire of Rome on Christian community, which escalated the persecution of the early church. Right? They went on to the next 200 years until it escalated further under Emperor Diocletian, where early Christians lost their legal rights, lost their land and possessions, and were forced to renounce the Bible. And in 301 to 304, they were being burned alive and fed to lions. Right? Pagans were doing this. This is called the Diocletian persecution, 313. Right? And so what we start to see here is that thousands were imprisoned and slain, but also thousands sprang their places, and the gospel continued to spread. They said, you can't torture us, you can't kill us, you can't condemn us. None of this is going to stop us from preaching the message. And the more often they were mown down by you, the more number we grew. The blood of the Christian is seed, right? So this is this whole idea that Constantine understood that he's not going to be able to stop him like this. And so in the last video I did on the analogy of the ice cream cone, it showed this concept of he just used the same the doctrine of Balaam. And so rather than outlawing, right, Constantine used the doctrine of Balaam, which was they were unable to suppress the early Christian movement through persecution, so they did the reverse. Right? Constantine served under the Roman Empire Diocletian, so he knew of, he was part of this whole persecution. And he understood that he was only going to be able to achieve domination of the entire area by uniting paganism and Christianity. And so, setting the stage, right, he created this act in 313, which is the end of the Diocletian persecution, and it was agreement to treat Christians benevolently. And so all of a sudden we see how after 300 years of harsh persecution, right, murders and imprisonment, all of a sudden Christianity was no longer persecuted, but actually elevated to the natural religion. So it's like we see persecution, not working. Okay, boom, let's reset something else. And in 325, right, the Roman Empire Constantine sought to merge Christianity with paganism. And Constantine pretended to convert to being a Christian, but this was clearly just an act, as paganism remains legal and present in Constantine. He also was still running the cult Sol Invictus. And it wasn't until the Edict of Thessalonica, which made Catholicism the state religion of the Roman Empire, and it condemned any other Christian creed as heresies, right? So that's in 380. Then we see in 538 how this was a major turning point where Justinian declared himself to be a theologian. There was a major shift, right? This brought on a transition of what belonged to the Roman Empire and handed over in 538 to the church as a papal function. So Justinian upheld the supremacy of the papacy and implemented a seventh-day Sabbath persecution. How interesting is that? That every time that they're trying to create a false form of worship, they go after the seventh day. So seventh day Sabbath keepers were being persecuted. We see how, this idea of Christian persecution stopping, but then adopting Christianity, calling it Roman Catholicism. But this was really what was called interpretatio Christiana. Man, I can't talk today. Which was taking everything that was Christian and just taking everything that was pagan, I should say, and just putting a Christian brand name on it. And a letter from Pope Gregory talked about this whole, laid out his plans, right, of allowing people to retain outward forms of their traditions while changing the object of the veneration to God. And so this idea of maintaining traditions. And we actually also, you can see the entire letter. It's it's just a fact of history that the Pope was instructed not to destroy temples which were used to worship devils, and further that while some outward gratifications were retained by the people, making it easy, right? So this was a power play at best, but it could be also seen as a satanic infiltration by the papacy. Right? John Calvin blasted the Roman Catholic Church, which calls attention to the rebranding of pagan deities to Christian saints. So what's happening here is the goal was to disguise truth as lies, right? To invert reality, to make light dark and dark light, right? This is how you would look through a glass sphere and you see it's inverted. And this is the foundation of occultism, right? This is really a thing, by the way. If you look through a glass, it actually does that, which is kind of neat. But it was taken by the darkness, right? This is the crystal ball, an inverted world, right? Where Satan has tried to, create misinformation and lies. And so this misinformation, this lies, right? This idea of, we read here, of substituting everything, right? This comes out in the papacy. And we read in the Bible, there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Well, what does blasphemy mean? It means claiming to be God. And who was claiming to be God? We read how Pope Innocent III, responsible for the big genocide in France, actually burned people and skinned them alive who would not adopt the pagan doctrine, who condemned the Magna Carta and forbade the reading of the Bible even, right? When we look at him, he expressed how he was actually God on earth. He says, this is the Catholic Church, okay? Says the Pope holds the place on earth, not simply of man, but the true God. Are you guys getting this? So the idea of the Protestant Reformation wasn't about selling indulgences. It was about not worshiping Satan. The Catholic Church is the Antichrist. The Pope is the Antichrist, right? Usually what we see here is, everyone was pushing up and testifying the supremacy of the Pope, right? Canon law is a set of ordinances and regulations made by the Catholic Church, which stated that God has given the Pope ability to interpret the Bible and the papacy desired, even if it means changing the word of God. Right? Do you get that? So it's no longer about Christianity. Anything that comes from the seed of popery is not Christianity. In this Harvard Law course on political theory with the topic, The Formation of Persecuting Society, the course deeply studies the canon law. And what we find out with this whole thing here is it says, we read the quotes of Hostinus on how God and the Pope are to be regarded as the same. And the Pope holds a place of God. Now, look, this is the very definition of blasphemy. This is not, there's no gray area here. This is black and white. It's an inversion. This is supported by Prompta Biblicatha, whatever, this article. Okay? I mean, this not article, this document, how the Pope has the power to dispose of God's law, as the Pope is not man, but God. This signifies that the whole triple layer crown signifies the King of Heaven, the King of Earth, and what they call the King of Hell. So are you getting this? Right? Are you seeing that this is outright just demonic? And so when we read in the second angel's message about how Babylon has fallen, right? That's the papacy, and how she's made everyone drink of the wine of her fornication, right? We ask, well, what's fornication? How is she getting the Protestant church to participate in fornication? Well, we read in John 8:41 that we are not to be born of fornication because we have one Father, even God, meaning that worship outside of God is fornication. Simply put, fornication is false worship. And so when we read here that in the second angel's message that she, right, she being a female is typically indicating a church, right, this Babylon church has made all nations drink of her false worship. Right? And again, you can get into Bible symbolism and see that the husband is the wife, right? The husband is Christ, and the wife is the church. So when we talk about a wife or a female, it's a church. And this is backed up in 2 Corinthians 11:2, where we learn that God wants us to be a people undefiled from the world, virgins to Christ. So virginity is pure religion, keeping the commandments of God. So when we see also in the 144,000 that they were virgins, they were pure religion. They had a pure religion. So a woman who is a virgin is a pure church, a true church. And a defiled woman is a false church. In Revelation 17, when it says, the judgment of the great whore who committed fornication, so this is a false church, who committed fornication by not keeping the commandments, right, and by blaspheming God. So which church is this referring to? And I go through it in a much longer course called Bible Prophecy. I recommend you jump into that one. But ultimately, Babylon the Great is a false church, right? And it shows very clearly that papal Rome became pagan Rome. But let's get some more clues. So who is the spiritual whore, right? We read, tell you the mystery of the woman, the beast. The heads are of 7 mountains which the woman sits on. So which church sits on 7 mountains? Just Google it. Right? What city was built on 7 hills? Rome. This is a, home to the Catholic Church. Interestingly enough, the Eastern Orthodox Church also built on 7 hills. So we see 2 churches, both sit on 7 hills, right? Both identified in Revelation 17. The East Orthodox and the West, the Catholic, both of those are the whore. Now, we know from history, in 1054, the Great Schism, East-West Schism, was a culmination of theological and political differences which formed these two. In this return, still referring to them as Christianity, right? If we continue reading in Revelation, we start to see how after this Diocletian persecution of 10 days, which we saw already, how, in this, there was then this doctrine of Balaam, right? So we see that's the compromise to Constantine, okay? We see how the church been become corrupted by paganism, right? We talked earlier also about this idea of everything being switched, right? Everything being substituted. So everything that was previously pagan, right, is now substituted for Christianity of some sort. And let's look at examples of that. So we see how the goddess Venus, which we know as Semiramis, was rebranded as Mary, okay? We see how, Mercury was used, as Saint Anthony. It was actually a rebranding of Mercury. How Saint Hubert was a rebranding of Artemis. See, it's the exact same thing with the deer and the bow. Like it's just really obvious. It's not even like it's not even a leap, right? Asclepius, right, became 2 saints, Cosma and Damian, right? The patron saints of pharmacy and medicine. This is where we're getting that from. We see St. Peter, right, is rebranded as Janus, holding the keys of Janus. Now notice that, Peter is the most frequent, epitaph of Janus. We also see how, Jupiter, let's just leave it, let's talk about this in here first. So the 2 heads there, we see that, right? Right, we see how in his hand has the keys. That's the Roman Catholic Church symbol, and that's the keys of Janus. Also Zeus, right? So Saint Peter is rebranded as, or Peter is rebranded as Zeus. He's also the keys of Janus is now Peter, right? So again, Peter is taking the form of both Zeus and Janus. But Peter says himself, I'm a man, don't worship me. So when he says that he's a man, and it's very clear, and yet we're worshiping him as a saint, why is that? Because we're not worshiping Peter, right? They're wanting us to worship Janus and Zeus. So all of these Christianized sites start forming, right? We see this rebranding of paganism to Roman Catholicism under the banner of Christianity, which is just rebranded paganism. And they were told, don't mess with the temples, right? Keep these Roman temples. And Pantheon was kept, right? Pantheon meaning the temple of all gods. This became a Catholic church. So they're literally still worshiping pagan gods in the same location, just with a different name. We see how each of the pagan temples becomes a Catholic church. Temple of Romulus, right? All of these. Temple of Antonius. These all still exist, but they were literally pagan temples prior. Right, here's an interesting one. The cherished, Santa Princa was previously the temple of Mithras and still contains all the mosaics on the wall of Mithria. Okay, guys, I got to dive deep in this one real quick. We're going to come back in a second, but you guys got to understand this, okay? So what is Mithraism? Mithraism was the worship of Zoroastrianism. So we're literally full circle, right? The Catholic Church is not even hiding it. And what's interesting is how the worshippers of Mithra had a complex system of grades, had a united handshake, right? They met underground temples. What does it sound like? Well, this is where Freemasonry spawned. Watch my course on public secrets. Ultimately, Mithra came from the Persian, right? It was the pagan sun god known as the Babylonian Shamash, right? Greek Apollo. All of this goes back to Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. It's all the same. And so Mithra, which is very interesting, right? This is what the Mithra symbol looks like. So this is the god Mithra, okay? Here's another in a picture of the god Mithra, right? Does that look familiar? Does this look familiar to us? It's literally what we now call the Statue of Liberty, but it's paying homage to Mithraism. This is why I'm talking about in public secrets. I just show you guys how everything, it's like we're surrounded by literal paganism and we think, oh, that's a symbol of freedom. No, it's a symbol of oppression. It's literally, Mithraism, again, has this whole ingrained, it's so ingrained in the United States, okay? So this idea of they were meeting underground, they had secret handshakes, their initiates were required to swear an oath of secrecy and dedication. Again, what does this sound like? And by the way, what are they reciting? The Catechism. So what other secret societies have loyalty oaths connected to the Jesuits? Right? What other secret societies have different grades? Initiation to Mithraism, the Jesuits. It's been a long recognized that there are many similarities between the rituals and symbolism of the ancient Mithric mysteries and those of modern Freemasonry. So Freemasonry comes from Mithraism. So people that are Freemasons, they don't know it at the bottom level, but when they get up to level 30, they understand who they actually worship, and it's Lucifer. It's not uncommon for new members joining the fraternity to find little education. They're not told about this at the beginning. So only at the higher levels of Freemasonry do you figure this out, right? And Freemasonry is a product of the Jesuit system. How is it, though, the question is asked, that Freemasonry can operate so openly and yet keep its secrets so well hidden? It's this whole system. What's also interesting is just all of the pagan symbolism that we see. One is this hand sign here, but also notice behind the hand, there's this sun circle, right? It's all about being the sun god. This hand symbol, right? The story is that it was this is the benediction sign from St. Peter. And he says, oh, he had nerve damage, so his last two little fingers couldn't come up. So that's what we're doing. No. This is silly. Why would a church purposely use a sign of a defect as a religious service? No, it's not logical. Where does this actually come from? So if you go into it, it's more than a coincidence, because it's a very intentional sign that they're always giving, right? The fingers are placed very particularly, but where does the sign actually come from? It's no secret. Look up who they worship. It's devil worship. In fact, if you look into Baphomet, right? Baphomet is a deity with the hand symbols, okay? They were worshipped by the Knights Templar. Who were the Knights Templar? A Catholic military order. Complete full circle, guys. Look, it's so obvious. It's frustrating that people don't get this. So the Catholic Church, right, has a military order called the Knights Templar. They worship who? The Pope? No, they worship Baphomet. Who is Baphomet? Baphomet is the devil. The devil's using this very specific sign that the Pope uses. So the Pope is just the general, essentially, of the Knights Templar, which is a military organization for the devil. It is what it is, right? And so you say, well, that seems a little bit harsh there, Rob. You think I'm being harsh with this? Then look it up. John Calvin. I deny that the seed is apostatical, where not is seen but shocking apostasy. I deny the Pope to be the vicar of Christ. He is the Antichrist. Your Roman Catholic Church is the synagogue of Satan. They all knew it, guys. This is why I'm trying to say, if you're having any sort of ecumenical movement with the papacy, you're literally in the bed with the devil. Martin Luther, the Pope is the Antichrist, but you shouldn't just know that, right? He says, you must be armed with the scripture, so that you can not only call the Pope the Antichrist, but also know how to prove it, so clearly that you would die with this conviction. So how do we prove that the Pope is the Antichrist? Well, there's this idea of number of the beast. Here is wisdom, let him have understanding, count the number of the beast. This is Revelation 13:18. Right? Here is wisdom, and this number is a man. And the number is 666. What does 666 even mean? Well, let's break it down. How do you count a number? The only way I know how to count a number is with Roman numerals. So I should be looking for words with these letters or symbols. And they should also have something associated with Rome, right? So Roman numerals. You can't make this stuff up. Count the number. It's the number of a man. Okay, we know the number's a man. Well, who is the man we should be looking for? Here's this guy here. The title has Vicarius Filii Dei, the Vicar of Christ. Right? This is printed, by the way, on his helmet. The helmet that we saw earlier that is there to represent the three stages, right? We saw this earlier, how he is overseeing, right, the heaven, the earth, and the hell. And this is his own way. They're claiming this, right? This is not something I'm putting on them. They're literally claiming this themselves. So if we look up, what does this Vicarius Filii Dei, which is printed on this, right? It says here, right here. Question, what are the letters in the Pope's crown, and what do they signify, if anything? This comes from our Sunday Visitor, okay, Catholic Journal. The letters in the Pope's crown are these, Vicarius Filii Dei, which is Latin for the Vicar of Christ. Sure it is. But it also spells out, if you add up the numbers together, 666. Here is wisdom. You want to know wisdom? Understand who the Pope is. Well, if you want to know wisdom, actually understand who God is. But we got to also, like we said, we got to know, right? We read here, the Pope is Antichrist. Know how to prove it. Okay? A lot of things is also by their fruits you'll know them. So when this Christian adoption happened, did they actually stop killing? No. Actually, killing continued, but they called them now heretics. So all of a sudden, we were killing Christians. That stopped. Now they're now saying we are Christians, and now all of a sudden they're killing heretics, right? And this was a absolutely methodical killing spree. It's called the Trail of Blood. And if we're not sure how far the Pope would go, in 1252, Pope Innocent IV, which is an ironic name, authorized the use of torture as a tool for the Inquisition. So the medieval Inquisition was a series of inquisitions that slowly merged into more or less a continuous process of arrest, interrogation of suspected heretics. Right? The Inquisitors often accompanied that they were, complained that they were not able to achieve what they wanted. They wanted more power. So the Pope gave it to them. And to get a sense of the Inquisition, we can research some of the most violent offenders. These are Inquisitor generals from Germany, Spain, right? And these are like the most valuable player for the Pope. So who we got? Conrad, he was a Catholic priest, took an active part in this campaign in France. Considered by many historians to be an act of genocide, right? And for this egregious efforts, he was eagerly supported by Pope Innocent III and Pope Gregory, who went on to appoint him as the defender to young Elizabeth. And he took on the role of her spiritual advisor, but he just abused her and his power, separating her from her children and beating her. And she died at 24. We see here Bernard Gouy, right? Catholic roster, we have the Inquisitor under Clement V and Pope John the 22nd. Very aggressive, convicted of about 1,000, of heresy. That's 7% of them are executed, 30% imprisoned, forced to wear crosses, sent on compulsory pilgrimages. Right? Then we got this guy here, right? Widespread torture to obtain confessions, burning people at the stake. Right? We've got Diego's, who's the saint of a man who took over, was also hated Jews, Muslims, showed excessive cruelty, right? So bad that the reports would come back to the papal leadership about this guy, and they quote, he has no regard for God or justice. They kill, steal, and rape girls. Yeah, so this is who the vicar of Christ says, right? But by their fruit you'll know them. This is the dragon. And the dragon would make war with the remnant. Well, the dragon's Lucifer, but through the went to make war with the remnant, right? Which keep the commandments of God. So Satan is using his military general, the Pope, and his also the Jesuit general, right, to ultimately kill off anyone who spoke out. John Wycliffe, right, spoke out, killed. John Huss spoke out, burned him at the stake alive. There's this entire persecution. We see this concept of how the Catholics would go against anyone who tried to maintain a pure religion. So anyone that tried to maintain purity would be killed. And the ones who were most persecuted were the Waldensians and other groups who hid away in the Alps. We read in the Bible that spiritual Israel, right, the woman, fled into the wilderness and was there for 1,260 days. So this 1,260 years, what we see went from the pagan Rome up until 1798, when the papacy inflicted a deadly wound. And so the Waldensians were in nature, up in the woods, right? But the Catholic Church would come up there and they would burn them, and they would try and kill them, as many as they could, right? What was the title of them was A Light That Shineth in Darkness. That was the title of the Waldensians. And their whole thing was, let your light so shine, right? This whole concept, thy word is a lamp to the feet. And so they protected the word, the Bible, with their life. Interesting also how the 7 stars are 7 Waldensian valleys, right? And we see how, how egregious the Roman Catholic Church was killing these people. It was absolute genocide. There's so much more about this, and I really recommend a video called Waldensians, the Alps, as well as learning more about them, because this is what's going to happen to the final church again. And I saw a woman drunken with the blood of the saints. So the whore, the woman here, drunken, right, false worship, with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs. Which church is this referring to? Obviously the Catholic Church. And so this was what was being protested, right? This is what the Reformation was, just like a very clear, like, look, this is Satanism, but they didn't see it as well. So it started off with Martin Luther just protesting, essentially, getting, paying for indulgences. But this is why, as I mentioned in my last video, and I did it somewhat sarcastically, of showing how the ice cream cone concept, but there was many reformers that tried to keep pulling little pieces and little pieces out. But during this time, they were branded as heretics. And during this time, we see a counter-reformation appear. And so I didn't get into this course, but the Knights Templar were killed off by the King of France on Friday the 13th. That opened up the opportunity for the Reformation to start. And when the Reformation started, right, the Catholic Church was completely caught off guard. And they recognized that they need to essentially combat this, because it was getting out of control, right? The Counter-reformation started really moving, and they recognized we got to pull these people back in, because all of a sudden there's many different religions and denominations and different groups coming out of this. And they're like, no, we are Christianity. And the Counter-Reformation tried to pull everybody back together as Christians. So the Council of Trent issued condemnations of anyone that identified as heresies by essentially, if you're a Protestant, you're a heretic. So you need to be a Christian, which was Catholic. And they enforced this with the Society of Jesuits. And I've talked about them several times, but so many people understood that these were a seek to destroy Protestantism, and they were the biggest enemy of Protestantism. The SS had been organized by Heinrich Himmler according to the principles of the Jesuit order. So they were a well-organized killing machine, so much so the Nazis were like, wow, these guys got it going on. Let's copy what they're doing, right? The Jesuits are a military order. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, by the way, okay? We have John Adams, right? If there ever was a body of men who merited eternal damnation, it's this. It is in the hell in the Society of the Loyalists, right? We read again, Jesuitism is the power behind the papal throne. We read that seducing many in the service of Roman Pontiff away from national allegiance with the Jesuits. We read here, the brothers Karamov, right? They don't even believe in God, perhaps, right? They understood that this is not a religious order. This is literally devil worship, branded as Roman Catholic Church, as a way to, it's paganism grouped with a Christian veneer. Professing to renounce the world, but under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes often concealed. The Jesuits rapidly spread themselves over Europe. Wherever they went, followed a revival of popery. So the Jesuits were there to bring back the Protestant Reformation, to have it stop, right? And the same office of Inquisition still exists today. They're just rebranded as the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. And its mission is still to defend the church from heresy, meaning anyone who stands against them, right? It's just rebranded. And I guess like the Inquisition, word would bring up bad memories of papal cruelty. So they just call it the Holy Office. But it's the same thing. It's the Inquisition. And again, there's so many different, quotes and timelines here. Ultimately, what I want to get at is just how we need to recognize, right, that just because we're, have a title called Protestant doesn't mean that we've actually moved outside of Protestantism, or outside, I should say, of Catholicism. There needs to be a complete reset, getting back to what Jesus gave us, right? The word he gave us. And it feels like we're still locked in tradition, and then pretending, pretending to, it's a pure religion because we've removed, baptism of babies, or we've removed paying for this or that. But if you're still, if you haven't really gone through and studied yourself approved and see what it really comes down to, what you'll find is there's a major component missing. And what's interesting again is that when we get into the fourth church, we see what the church looks like after it's contaminated with Christianity and paganism, right? That's the sickly horse, the pale horse, because the church is almost dead because of this combination of paganism. Christianity has become an established religion in the Roman Empire, and it took the place of paganism, but it's just baptized paganism. Hordes of baptized pagans diluted the moral energies and organized Christianity to the point of impotence. So the idea is that you can't just say you're Christians if the body is primarily unconsecrated, right? Catholicism is baptized paganism where they've hijacked the name Christianity. And there needs to be a choice to be made, right? So we have to understand this and then decide, do I want the seal of God, or am I going to get the mark of the beast? Right? These are choices. Remember, we talked about this idea of a binary choice, right? And so we have this choice of who we serve. And I think what's important or interesting is just what the mechanism is, right? People are always saying like, well, choose this day who you may serve, right? We have to make this choice. And people may be afraid of getting the mark of the beast and say, oh, how can I avoid this? What is it? And people think, oh, it must be a vaccination. It must be a microchip, right? No, it's in the thoughts. It's in your head, your forehead. That's your thoughts. It's your hand. It's your actions. And so if we forget about the mark of the beast and figure out instead, which side am I on, right? Then you'll get the side, you strive after the seal of God. It's very interesting, but the only commandment that starts with the word remember is the one that Christians forget. The seventh-day Sabbath has actually been around since the start of time, and it's been preserved by the Jews and early Christian church before the Roman Empire admitted they changed it. This is not up for debate. It's literally They literally changed it. And go watch my course on the Sabbath. Sabbath truth is the name of the course. It literally, all of the quotes, they acknowledge they did it, right? And now understand that there's going to be a decree that's going to go forth. And this is the National Sunday Law. And this will be when we finally make our decision, one way or the other. Okay? It's obedience to the principles of God, right? It's this idea that we need to make a choice. Who do we worship? Do we worship man's tradition or do we worship God's law? Because if you go watch the course on Sabbath truth, I lay it out very, very clear with tons of references from the papacy. They admit to changing the Sabbath. And also, we just read how in 321, right, how the decree was to persecute Sabbath worship. We went over it ourselves. And so we start to see is that there ends up being this dichotomy between, is you looking at man's tradition or are you worshiping God? Ultimately, it's more than just a day. Are we worshiping the Son God or are we worshiping the Son of God? The S-U-N or the S-O-N? And when we really get into it, we can see that are we worshiping the Son God, meaning of Tammuz, right? And the lineage, or are we worshiping the true form? Because that's the choice we have to make. It's going to be a choice between do we keep God's law, right, or not? It ultimately comes down to trust. Do we trust God and walk away from anything that man has to say and avoid any traditions and get back to what does the Bible has to say, right? Because you'll never find in the Bible, any justification for keeping Sunday. And so this really comes down to this choice we have to make. Do we trust God or not, right? And we're going to see this trust because remember we talked about at the very beginning, there was a mechanism, right? And that mechanism in the beginning was the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So do we eat of that fruit or not? Well, this is our new choice. This is the mechanism that God has given us now, is which day will we worship on? This will be our allegiance, okay? It's the allegiance of, and it's not just this, it's are we keeping all 10 of the commandments? But this is the one that's so easily that man forgets. And so I just highly ask, and I just pray that the Lord sends His Holy Spirit to guide your thoughts. Help us to choose this day who we serve. Help us to, Lord, I just ask that you instill just a desire to understand this more and for us to study to show ourselves approved and for us to look into it for ourselves, not to just obey man and his tradition, but to see how you've asked to be worshiped. And Father, I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.